All right, let's dive in. AUKUS, big topic, huge implications for Perth. We're talking nuclear subs, environmental impacts, your wallet, the whole shebang. Got some intel straight from defense experts, some pretty in-depth environmental and political reports, even some pieces digging into how the government's spending your tax dollars.
Yeah, and the thing is, this isn't some distant future scenario. This is happening now. Nuclear submarines right here in our backyard by 2027.
2027.
That's the timeline. So the ripple effects.
Yeah.
Huge, could be massive, environment, our wallets, everything.
Okay, so let's start with this panel discussion we've got. Top admirals from the US, UK, Australia.
Oh, the big guns.
Yeah. They seem pretty insistent that the Indian Ocean is like the center of everything. Strategically crucial. That's the phrase they kept using.
Yeah, strategically crucial, but it's not just about military stuff, right? They were highlighting that a ton of global trade goes through those shipping lanes.
Right.
So much rides in the Indian Ocean being stable and safe.
And for us here in Perth, it's even more personal, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. Our port, the undersea cables connecting us to the world, all the stuff we use daily, all of that relies on the Indian Ocean.
So what you're saying is, like, even my morning coffee depends on how stable the Indian Ocean is.
Pretty much. And the admirals, their whole argument is that a AUKUS, that's what keeps things stable. They see HMAS Sterling, our local naval base, as a key part of that.
HMAS Sterling. Okay, so then this whole submarine rotational force west thing, this SRF West, that's where it comes in.
Exactly. That's going to bring U.S. and U.K. nuclear subs here, regular visits to start, but could easily turn into a permanent presence.
They made it sound pretty exciting. Longer reach for operations, faster response times.
Yeah, there's a lot of strategic advantages from their perspective.
But then we've got this ABC News article, and it brings up some of the practical challenges. We're talking about potentially thousands of sailors and their families needing housing, schools, all of that.
Yeah, the logistics of it all, it's huge. And the question is Perth ready for that kind of sudden influx?
I mean, the housing market's already crazy here. It's tight.
Exactly. It's going to take a massive investment and some really smart planning to provide enough housing, schools, services for that many people.
Not to mention the whole issue of nuclear waste from these submarines. Where does that even go?
That's a big one, a big concern.
This ABC News piece, it mentioned they're proposing a facility right at HMAS Sterling just for the low-level radioactive waste these subs generate.
Right there at HMAS Sterling. Huh.
And people are asking, are there safer options, alternative locations? What are the long-term risks? All valid questions, I think.
Oh, absolutely valid. And then you've got the Greens WA. They've got a very different perspective on all of this.
Their article, it's pretty intense. They're saying AUKUS shoes could actually make Perth more of a target.
More of a target, not safer. Yeah, that's their argument.
Existential threat to Western Australia. That's a direct quote.
Strong words.
And they point to the risk of nuclear accidents. Statistically, the chances are slim, but it's still a possibility.
And they've got historical examples to back that up, which is unsettling.
So how does the Australian government's, the Naval Nuclear Power Safety Bill, how does that address all of this?
Well, it's supposed to. That's the aim. But the Greens WA, they're questioning whether it's enough.
Not strong enough.
They're not convinced, particularly when it comes to things like independent oversight and transparency. And then there's the long-term storage of this radioactive waste.
Yeah, that keeps coming up. What kind of waste are we talking about? Where will it end up?
Exactly. It all ties back into that proposed facility at HMAS Sterling and the concerns about its location. And then there's the cost.
Oh, yeah, this all sounds incredibly expensive.
Astronomical. Hundreds of billions of dollars, potentially.
Whoa, and who pays for that?
That's the question, isn't it? And it raises the issue of opportunity cost. Could that money be better spent elsewhere?
Like on education, healthcare, renewable energy, stuff that directly impacts people's lives.
Exactly. Your life, your pocketbook, all of that is affected by how this money is spent.
Speaking of money, that ABC News article about the waste facility, it mentioned a $9 million contract.
A $9 million contract? For what?
It went to McKinsey & Company, some consulting firm, for advisory services.
McKinsey. Interesting.
It definitely raised some eyebrows, especially because that same article, it brought up concerns about McKinsey's potential ties to the Chinese military.
Ties to the Chinese military? Wow.
So now we're talking about transparency, potential conflicts of interest, all with this incredibly sensitive EU's project.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about the decision-making behind all of this. Are the best interests of Perth and its residents really the top priority? It's a good question.
So we've got the overall cost of AUKUS, but then there's the potential impact on the local economy here in Perth. And we're already seeing rising property prices, rents are going up. Wouldn't this influx of personnel from AUKUS just make that worse?
It's a very real concern. Housing affordability is already a major issue here.
It is.
Adding thousands of new residents, many with families, it's going to put even more strain on the market. It's simple supply and demand.
Right.
You could see bidding wars, rents skyrocketing, people being priced out of their own city.
And the ripple effects on the cost of living that hits everyone who lives and works here.
Exactly. Including you. This isn't just some abstract concept. It's going to have a tangible impact on people's daily lives. And it's not just the number of people, it's the type of housing they'll need. We're talking families. They need schools, parks, healthcare, all those essential services that are already stretched thin as it is.
I remember that ABC News article mentioned the WA premier is pretty excited about this. He sees it as a huge opportunity for job creation, a boost for Western Australia.
Yeah, a golden opportunity. I bet he sees the dollar signs. But will those benefits actually reach everyday people here in Perth? Will those be good jobs? The kind that pay well, offer stability?
Right. Yeah.
Or will it just be a wave of temporary workers, putting more strain on resources, not really benefiting the community in the long run?
It sounds like there's a real risk that the average person in Perth could end up fitting the bill for AUKUS without actually seeing much in return.
Yeah, and that's the big question, isn't it? Are we sacrificing long-term sustainability, the well-being of our own community, just for some short-term economic gains that might not even happen?
And even if there are some jobs created, what's the trade-off? A higher cost of living, environmental damage, potential security risks. We need to be really careful about this.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the lack of transparency, the accountability we talked about earlier. That McKinsey contract, it's a red flag. Hard to trust the government's decisions when things like that are happening, you know?
Yeah, it does make you wonder.
A project this big, with this much impact, it demands transparency. People in Perth, they deserve to know how decisions are being made. What are the real costs? What are the risks? And how are those risks being mitigated?
Right. If we don't have that transparency, then trust erodes.
Exactly. And then it becomes really hard to have a real conversation about what's best for everyone.
The Greens WA article, they were pretty dramatic, but they raised some good points. They're questioning whether AUKUS is really making Australia and Perth safer.
Yeah, their concerns about us becoming a target, those aren't unfounded.
It's true that historically, hosting foreign military bases, it has often made countries more likely to get pulled into conflicts.
Right, and when you're talking about nuclear submarines, the stakes are even higher.
It is a bit unsettling, to be honest.
Yeah.
Perth's known for its beaches, its laid-back lifestyle.
Exactly.
And now we might become a potential target in some geopolitical conflict. That's not what anyone wants.
And let's not forget the environmental risks.
Right. There's more than just the nuclear waste issue.
Exactly. Increased submarine traffic, what's that going to do to marine life? That's a concern, too.
The Indian Ocean, it's not just some strategic waterway. It's a whole ecosystem.
Right. It supports a huge amount of biodiversity. So more noise pollution, potential accidents, disruptions to migration patterns, that could be devastating.
Yeah. It's important to weigh those environmental costs against whatever benefits AUKUS might bring.
Absolutely. We have to ask ourselves, are we willing to sacrifice our natural environment for military alliances? For geopolitics? That's a big question.
It does feel like this whole AUKUS conversation is very polarized.
Yeah, very black and white.
On one side, you've got the government, defense officials talking about economic benefits, security advantages, and on the other side, groups like the Greens WA are warning about the risks, the costs.
It's hard to know who to believe what the right thing to do is.
It really is.
And that's where critical thinking comes in. You can't just blindly accept one side or the other.
Right.
You have to look at the evidence, consider different perspectives, and then form your own opinion. And to do that, you need accurate information. That's why this transparency, this open dialogue, it's so crucial.
It does feel like there's a lot at stake here, not just for Perth, but for the whole country.
Absolutely. AUKUS is a huge turning point for Australia. It's going to have a ripple effect for generations to come. This isn't a decision to be taken lightly.
We've talked a lot about the potential downsides of AUKUS, but it's fair to say that some people do see it as a necessary step, to ensure Australia's security in a world that feels increasingly uncertain.
Right. They're looking at China, China's growing military power, their assertiveness in the region. They see that as a real threat.
Yeah.
And they believe that Australia needs to strengthen its alliances, boost its defense capabilities to deter aggression.
The admirals in that panel discussion, they definitely made a compelling case. The strategic importance of the Indo-Pacific region, the role AUKUS plays in maintaining stability, They were very convincing.
They kept emphasizing that AUKUS is not about starting a conflict, it's about preventing one.
Right.
It's about sending a message. Any aggression against Australia or its allies will be met with a strong response.
But then the Greens, WA, they argue that AUKUS could actually have the opposite effect.
Yeah, they're worried it will escalate tensions, make conflict more likely, especially with China.
They see it as a dangerous arms race, fueling mistrust, pushing China and the West further apart.
Exactly.
So it feels like we're caught in this web of geopolitical tension, and UKV is right at the center of it.
It is a delicate balancing act. The stakes are incredibly high. On one hand, we need to be secure, protect our interests, but on the other hand, we need to avoid conflict, find ways to coexist peacefully with all our neighbors, including China.
And that brings us back to Perth. What role will our city play in all of this?
Right. Perth's on the front lines of the Indo-Pacific.
Exactly.
So will we become a military outpost, a symbol of force?
Yeah.
Or can we be a bridge builder, a center for diplomacy, a place where cultures can connect, find common ground?
That's the challenge, isn't it?
It is, and it's a challenge we need to face head on. What kind of future do we want for Perth? Do we prioritize economic growth above all else? Or is there a more balanced approach? One that considers the environment, social justice, the well-being of all residents.
These are big questions.
They are, and the decisions we make now will shape the future of our city and our region for decades to come.
It feels like we're at this crossroads with AUKUS. There's potential, right? Economic growth, stronger military presence. But then there's the flip side. The environmental damage, the cost of living going through the roof, the possibility that Perth becomes, a target.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack. And I think for me, what really stands out is the scale of it all. AUKUS, it's not just some quick fix. It's a commitment that's going to reshape Perth for decades.
The admirals, they kept saying strategic patience. That AUKUS is a long game. We need to be in it for the long haul. Adapt as things change.
And they're right. We're in the middle of this global power shift. U.S., China, Australia, everything's in flux. AUKUS is just one piece of that, one piece of a very complicated puzzle.
But even if AUKUS does last, even if it sticks around, there's no guarantee that those benefits they talk about will actually materialize. We could end up with a damaged environment, a city that's unaffordable, higher security risks, and none of the economic prosperity we were promised.
And that's why these conversations are so important. We need to have them now. Weigh the potential good against the risks and make sure that the decisions being made, they actually benefit the people who live here, the people of Perth.
The Greens WA article, they were pretty adamant that walking away from AUKUS, that might actually be the safest option for Australia, for our sovereignty, for our security.
They believe that diplomacy, stronger relationships in the region, that's the best way to ensure peace.
Interesting.
It's a perspective worth thinking about for sure, though I'm sure there are plenty who would disagree. The people who see AUKUS as absolutely essential to counter China's influence.
It feels like Perth's future is, well, it's up in the air. If we do become this major hub for nuclear submarines, like the admirals envision, what does that mean for us, for our identity as a city?
Right. Do we become a militarized zone? Or can we hold on to that reputation we have? As a vibrant city, welcoming, a good place to live, peaceful.
These are tough questions.
They are. And we, as a community, we need to find the answers. What do we want Perth to be? Do we chase economic growth no matter the cost? Or do we want something more balanced, something that takes care of the environment, that prioritizes social justice, that considers the well-being of all residents?
This deep dive, it's been, well, a lot to take in. I think what's clear is that AUKUS, it's a major turning point for Perth.
Yeah.
And the consequences, they could be amazing, or they could be really concerning.
It's true. And what strikes me is how this one agreement, it ties together so many different things. Global strategy, what it means for Perth, the environmental concerns, the economic possibilities. It's easy to get caught up in the headlines, but I think this deep dive, it's giving you the information you need to form your own opinion.
And that's really what matters. We want to give you, the listener, the power to understand these complex issues so you can be part of the conversation that shapes our future.
Absolutely. Here's something to think about. As Perth moves forward, how can we make sure that the voices of everyday people are heard, that our concerns are taken seriously, and that the decisions being made, they reflect our values, our hopes for our city?
That's a great question, a question for all of us to consider. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into AUKUS Perth.